So I've got about an hour. That's what it looks like. Am I right on that? 1 hour. All right. We're starting about 5 minutes late for Random Pagan Standard Time. So we will roll right in. So today we're going to talk about what I've entitled An Awfully Big Adventure. Those who are fans of J. Barrie's work will know that that is, of course, a euphemism for death from Peter Pan. But what I wanted to talk about specifically are the kinds of signposts and the things that souls encounter after death in Indo-European lore. And this is a pretty broad topic. There are a lot of different Indo-European cultures. I don't know that we've talked about that in a workshop yet, but Indo-European is a language family. It is not a cultural family as much as it is linguistic. It is certainly not a bloodline or anything like that. This is merely an exercise in comparative mythology more than anything else. If you have questions, if you want to chat about something, I'm more than happy to dive a little bit deeper into some of this stuff. But this is a pretty high-level overview. What we'll do this evening in ritual is it'll be a ritual to meet our ancestors, however we define those. So, death is, as all who live know, death is inevitable. It's something that we fear, it's something that we try to avoid. We hope that our children don't experience it, all while knowing that that hope is entirely in vain. There is nothing that can prevent it. We all meet this particular end. That weighs on us in a deep way, in many ways. We don't think about it all the time, but when we do, it's enormous and it's frightening. Hopefully, as our ancestors have done for many years, by talking about it, by discussing the things that we expect to see and what those things might mean, we can lift some of that weight and learn to enjoy our lives a little bit more. The fear, the avoidance, the hope that surround death, along with the knowledge that it will come, seems to drive our experiences and our discussions. We work through the world and we understand that there are things here that may not be available in the next life. We worry about that, and so we try and enjoy them now. As modern neo-pagans, the next life is hard to describe. Every one of us has a different idea of what it might look like. Some of us see it as reincarnation. Some of us see it as a land of plenty. Some of us see it as a beautiful place that we can enjoy and live in. But for all of us, it's something different. And that's okay. Death is certainly a many-varied thing, and all of us will, in our own time, experience it in a different way. There is no single right vision of the afterlife. And so, again, what I'm about to describe, that geography of the afterlife, the way that souls work through it, this is all speculative fan fiction in many ways, based on a variety of experiences, and passed down to us through myth, legend, and hopefully even a little bit of knowledge. So even though there is no one right vision, we have a variety of texts from the afterlife that give us kind of commonalities of experience. We can conjure a rough outline of what death might look like and what the geography of that afterlife might be. The first thing, of course, the thing that precedes death is life. And life is spent avoiding, and succumbing to death. The aim of life in the ancient Indo-European world is less about what the next world holds than we would think as modern people. We grow up in a culture that is obsessed with what happens after death. We fear it, we are concerned with it. A lot of this has to do with the Judeo-Christian culture that we live in modern times. I am happy to report that that particular outlook on death is both not terribly comforting and also not terribly common in the rest of the world. But the IE cosmos, the Indo-European cosmos, is built on this idea of reciprocity, this idea of working with the spirits, working with the land around us. why do we do this if this world is what is, in many ways, what's important, and the next world isn't quite so much? And I'll talk about why in a little bit. In a lot of ways, we make sacrifice and we make offerings because it's the right thing to do. It's the thing that we've learned how to do. We clearly receive blessings in return for those. Piety and integrity, the work that we offer, all of these things seem to improve our lives. And so we keep doing them. It's a perfectly logical process. In the ancient world, the result of right relationships is not blessings in the next world, but blessings in this. And it is, in many cases, the same for us. When we go to make offerings, we tend to make offerings to spirits for good health, for getting a job, for all these kinds of things. We're not often looking past that, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But the primary one is, I think, that we can't do much about the next life, but we can do plenty about this one. And so our concerns are very often here. One of the things that we find in the ancient texts, and this is particularly described in the Rig Veda, there are three things that are called out for. Long life, wealth, and abounding in heroic sons. Now this is, of course, the Vedas, terribly patriarchal, but what it gets at is the idea that we want health. We want to live a comfortable life. We want good fortune. So we want to be lucky in life. We want to get the things that we need. These are perfectly normal pursuits. But the abounding in sons always catches people off guard because, frankly, it's just not what we're into these days. But what it means is not having sons. In a very strict ancient sense, sure, it does kind of mean that. But what it's getting at is not having sons to carry on your bloodline or anything like that. It's having people who follow, who remember your name. The aim of this life, in many ways, is to achieve immortality, because we know we can't do that physically. So we look for other ways to do it. And the ancient texts really focus in on that. What is truly sought in this world, in many ways through piety in the ancient world, is immortality through fame or notoriety. The only way for us to continue is this known quantity that we have that is life, this thing that we know. The only way for us to continue it is to be remembered in this life. So people seek fame, they seek fortune, they seek to have their names known. And again, if they have kids, then they want those children to carry on their memory in a positive way. And if they don't have kids, they want to touch other lives in other ways. There are lots of ways toward fame, and we'll cover some of those in a bit. But ancient warriors don't care for Valhalla, but for the fame that accompanies dying bravely with his host of men. You might look at Achilles as a primary example. Achilles is promised two things. He's promised that if he stays home from Troy and doesn't go to war, that he will live in the memory of his sons and their sons and his sons after them, and for a few generations he will be remembered. And then his memory will fade from history and he will be no longer. But if he goes to Troy, he will have no sons, he will have no heir, but what he will receive is immortality and fame. His name will never leave the tongues of men. And we know what choice he made, because we still talk today of his wrath and of his fight at the gates of Troy. So, escape from death is through fame or immortality, and you might call this, the Indo-European phrase for this is escaping the fetters of death, getting away from those things that hold you down when you die. Death is described as dragging men off in Homer. It casts snares upon men in Horace's Odes. Hell has ropes that bind the dead. Neriti has iron fetters and a pillar of iron that the dead are bound to. And these bindings lead to a different kind of afterlife, one that is feared and involves being forgotten or dying young without issue, or not living life to its fullest. So escape comes from one of two paths, either ethical work or religious work, or being a warrior. Interestingly enough, in Indo-European cultures where the warrior is prominent, ethical work and being a good fighter tends to kind of carry you through. But in Indo-European cultures where the priest and the pious are well rewarded, and the mythology supports that, it is piety that is often cited as what carries you forth away from the fetters of death. In the Celtic world, the Druids serve a function similar to the Brahmins in the Vedic world. And Caesar specifically mentions that the worst punishment that is dealt in the Celtic territories is the banning of people from sacrifice. You can't go to a sacrifice, you can't be sacrificed. You are essentially cut off from those religious works that can free you from those fetters of death, those things that tie you down after death. And we know, too, that it is not possible to escape death forever. It catches all of us. Said to Glaucus in the Iliad, if once out of this fight we could escape old age and death forever, I should not press forward, nor bid you to do so. But death in 10,000 shapes hangs over every one of our heads, and no man can elude him, and therefore go forward and win glory for ourselves, or yield it to another. And it's when we yield it to another, when we find glory for ourselves, that the journey of death really begins. So, in summation of all that I just said there, essentially, we have no way of achieving immortality physically. We wouldn't want to anyway, I don't think. We want to push death off maybe as long as we can, but at the end, we all know that we'll succumb. So, what do we do to make sure that our afterlife is good? We seek that fame, we seek that fortune, we find ways for others to remember our names. But once that happens, once that physical death happens, something happens to the soul. Specifically, soul and body become separated in the literature. And the soul takes a separate journey from the body. What happens to the body varies from culture to culture. In many cases, bodies are buried, bodies are burned. If you're really deeply into burial practices of ancient folks, there are lots of people here, I'm sure, who can chat with that. I can as well. Kirk knows a lot about that stuff. But the key thing is not how the body is necessarily disposed of, but the fact that body and soul are known to separate. There is a very clear distinction made in Rig Veda, Book 10, Hymn 6, 16, where Agni, who's the god of fire, or the god that actually is fire, technically, is addressed. And Agni, in this case, is the fire upon which the body of the deceased man is burned. And during the funeral hymn, an interesting thing happens. Two different Agnis appear. One Agni that carries off the body, and one Agni that carries off the soul. The one that carries off the body is there are two Indo-European words for fire. One of them is the word that we get our word fire from, which is pyre. Fire and pyre, they all come from that same Indo-European root. And the other one is, of course, ignite. So one of them is a very passive sort of thing, and the other one is very active. Agni, ignite, comes from that root. So I'm going to read a little bit of Rig Veda 10:16, and translations by Maurer, which, if you're looking for a good translation of the Rig Veda, part of it at least, Maurer is, at the moment, my favorite. I have not read the new complete translation, but I like Maurer's. But he says, "Do not burn him up, Agni. Do not scorch him, singe not his skin nor his body, and when you make him cooked, O Yadavedas, then send him to the fathers. Yadavedas is another word for Agni. You'll hear me say it a bunch of times, because it appears a bunch of times. So when you make him cooked, O Yadavedas, then give him over to the fathers. When he goes to this place, whether the spirits are led, then he shall be led to the will of the gods. Make your eye go to the sun, your breath to the wind, go to the heaven and to the earth according to your rule, or go to the waters, if there it is ordained for you, among the plants to take your place with your limbs. And then the poet changes his focus. He stops talking about taking the soul off, and he talks about the body. And he says, corpse-consuming Agni I send far off. Carrying the impurities, let him go to those whose king is Yama. And right here is this other Yadavedas, carry him off the oblation to the gods, the knowing one. So these two Agnis carry the body and the soul to completely different places. And may Agni carry her off with the corpse, who shall worship the fathers who thrive in the Rita, announce the oblations to the gods and the fathers. And again, they become one, and after the body's been consumed, and they announce the dead. So you've got two Agnis and two fires in the same funeral pyre. The fire that burns the corpse is not the fire that lifts the soul to the heavens, though it is clear from the hymn that they exist there in the same flame. And this is where body and soul separate, and where the journey truly begins. Because what we're concerned with is where the soul goes. Now, I've called this a geography a couple of times, and I think that's an important word for this, because as we think about the afterlife, the easiest way to think about it is as if it is a mapped out thing. Understand that as we go through this, we'll talk about different cultures and how they view these individual sections, I guess. But know that this is not a set in stone thing. It's just comparative mythology across the board. So the soul begins its journey by seeking out the realm of the dead, because that's where the dead go. The thing that you find about religion, especially ancient religion, is that it's actually very logical. The souls of the dead look for the realm of the dead because that's where they belong. When souls of the dead can't find the realm of the dead, they become things like angry ghosts roaming around. That's not what we're concerned with here. We're concerned with things that go in the right place. If you really want to talk about angry dead, they're fun. I love talking about them too. I don't have time. So, the particular location of the realm of the dead varies depending on the Indo-European tradition, but it's often a place beyond the waters. It's beyond the sea, it's across a river, it's under the water, it's at the center of a lake. It might be off to the south or the west. Those are very common areas where you'll find it. But when the soul arrives at those waters, he or she will often meet a ferryman. And most of us will have an image of that. Charon, of course, the ferryman of Greek mythology is the one most of us are likely familiar with. But he's described as an old man, a very old man. In Roman sources, like the Aeneid, they also indicate that the ferryman is old of age and haggard of visage. In the Volsunga saga, Sinfiotti's body is stolen from Sigmund when he gives the corpse to an old ferryman, who is, of course, Odin, because all old men who take dead bodies in the sagas are, Odin. In fact, in the Volsunga saga, anytime an old person gives or takes anything, it's probably Odin. So the ferryman takes the body, disappears with it, and never returns. And there are even Christian texts from the Celtic lands that include this boatman. And I would love to get into the Imramas, and if we have some time, I very well might, because it played very nicely into the ritual tonight. And I'm almost certain to touch on it at least a little bit. But St. Brendan, in his travels to the land promised to the saints, because of course there's a land promised to the saints, he travels with one Berinthus, whose name translates to white-haired. And it's another reference, again, to that old boatman. In a departure from standard i.e. myth, the ferryman in Vedic text is not a spirit figure, but the Brahmin or the priest who pours the sacrifice. To quote from one of the Brahmanas, truly the heaven-bound boat in the Agnihotra sacrifice. Truly the heaven-bound boat is the Agnihotra sacrifice. The two sides of the heaven-bound boat are the two altars. Truly the steersman of the boat is the milk-pouring priest. The change from spiritual figure to priest, physical, real person, might have occurred due to the proximity to water of the particular area. I mean, in the Mediterranean, you've got a lot of rivers that you've got to cross. Ferrymen are very common. They're not so common in Vedic India, or even Iranian or Slavic areas. By being further from bodies of water, substitution of a real physical priest for the supernatural entity makes some sense. It may also be due to the fact that there's a lot of control exercised by priests in those particular areas as well. So that might also contribute to that. But why are they all old? That's one of the real questions, and the more you look at it, the more it becomes a clear, at least to me, symbol that it is something that we must encounter. And I'll come back around to this over and over again. But why does he have white hair and an aged face? Why do they consistently refer back to signs of old age in their names? Why do they have wrinkles, white beards? It's because it brings us face to face with one of the realities of life, which is old age. Because old age is the last thing that you experience before death, ideally. Hopefully, for all of us. Hopefully. But it's that kind of that last piece. If we've made it there and faced our old age, then again, we've lived that complete life. We've moved to a place that is comfortable for us to start accepting the concept of death. Now, often there are choices to be made in the afterlife. And my favorite choice, the one I like to talk about the most, are the two wells and the two paths that there are to take. So after we face old age and we accept it, accepting it is paying the ferryman, moving across the water. And they may take us across waters of forgetfulness, they may take us across waters of memory. There are different interpretations depending on where you're going and what culture you're in. But one thing is very clear in Indo-European lore. There is a right way and there is a wrong way. So when you make the choice, you get to make the right choice or the wrong choice. Spoiler alert, I'll tell you which way to go based on the ancient lore, so now you'll know. So when you're faced with two paths, how do we determine the difference between them? How do we know which path goes one way and which one goes the wrong way? Indo-Europeans tended to consider it predetermined by your life, though there are things that you can do to escape that kind of predetermination. So if you lived a good life, it was much easier to find the right way. If you lived a bad life, it was much harder to find it. And again, we're not talking about angry ghosts here who can't find their way home, but keep them in the back of your mind. In Indo-European cultures where the priest dominates, I mentioned that they have a piety requirement more than anything else. It's good to be pious. That's how you learn where the right way is. So from the Rig Veda, again, this is book 10, book 10, hymn 2, verse 3. We have trod the path of the gods as far as we are able to know in advance. Agni, the knower, should sacrifice. He truly is the presiding priest, and he should arrange the ceremonies and the sacred occasion. So the right path is the path of the gods, the Devayana, the path of the fathers. These paths lead to the places where the soul can enter and possibly even later journey back, receive offerings from the ancestors. It's a clear path for those who know the way. In Zoroastrian religion, you have a bridge of separation that leads to a house of song. If you've not lived a good life, however, the bridge will be too thin for you to pass, and you will fall down into the house of lies. So, be kind, rewind. In Indo-European cultures, where warriors are dominant, such as the Germanic and the Greek cultures, the way to the afterlife is paved primarily with warrior deeds and right action. You might think about the Blessed Isles, the Norse Valhalla. These are attained by death in battle or a lifetime of battle. It's not always dying in battle in all the lore. Sometimes it's just living through it. Particularly in Greek lore, living through it is very, very good. It's good to live through your battles. The German path leads either to Valhalla, which is, it takes you there by the way of the gods, or to hell, takes you there by the way of hell. And it's worth noting that, because not everyone knows this, Hel, H-E-L, is not just a Marvel character, also a goddess of death and queen of the underworld. And in Greece, your path would either lead to the Isles of the Blessed or to Tartarus. As we've said before, the soul crosses that liminal water space, usually with a guide who represents old age. Some will encounter a second water space, either waters or sea, but at some point we know that there are waters that have to be crossed. And the waters are dangerous to the soul. After crossing the rivers, the waters, or the sea, the waters wash away memory, care, thought, and fear. And it might sound really cool to have fears washed away, but fears are based in memories. And when we forget about things, we lose a part of ourself. When we're relieved of these things, part of what makes us us washes away with them. There is a way to regain them after losing them. But you've got to know. You've got to know which direction to go. You've got to know what questions to ask. You have to know what to tell people. Probably the most well-known example appears in Plato's Republic. Plato describes two paths for the soul in the myth of air in his work. One that ascends and one that descends. And it indicates that it is through abstention from the waters in the underworld river, Lethe, whose name means forgetfulness or unmindfulness, you can retain your memories. But I will say that abstention is rarely an Indo-European value. So I think that there are other areas that are better suited to the kinds of things that we do as modern neo-pagans than necessarily hang out with Plato's algorithm, because this is way cooler. So there are examples out there of things that can best be described as cheat sheets for death. You can find a full listing of these things. There's a great book out there about Orphic gold tablets. And these are little tablets, they're amulets that are rolled up and put into the mouths of dead people and stuff like that to tell them which way to go. And the story goes kind of like this. You will find a spring to the left of the house of Hades, and standing beside that spring is a white cypress. Do not approach closely to the spring. You will find another flowing cold water from the pool of memory, and before it there are guards. Say, I am a child of earth and of starry heaven, but my lineage is of heaven alone. You must see this for yourself. I am perished and withered with thirst. Give me quickly the cold flowing water from the pool of memory. And they themselves will give to you to drink from the divine spring, and thereafter you shall reign among the heroes. We know that souls are thirsty, and that the journey thus far has left them parched. That is clear from the myth. This piece, these Orphic gold tablets, are part of a particular mystery school. And they give that geography. They give a map to what you're supposed to do. So, keep in mind, go to the left of the House of Hades, past the first spring, ignore the one with the white cypress, and tell the folks, the guards at the next spring, that you are a child of earth and of starry heaven. This works really well for us because, as we like to say in ritual, we are all children of earth. Our ritual language is giving you part of the answer. There are other underworld wells and vessels, drinking vessels that appear in other sources, that have the same kind of function as this spring. In Norse myth, Mimir drinks from a well using the Gjallarhorn, or the horn of the river Jarl, which is a major underworld river. And all who drink from the well are known to obtain supernatural wisdom. Odin gives up his eye just so that he can have a drink from this well. There's a story of Finn in Irish myth where he enters a lake and loses his youth and wisdom. Again, you could think about this as a very clear allegory for losing or confronting his old age and his senility. But he regains his youth through a drink from a magical otherworld cup that is kept beneath the she mound, and thereby also gains greater supernatural knowledge, as do the other of his warband party who drink from the same cup. The pools, the springs, the wells, the chalices, they're all fed by and connected to waters of underworld wisdom, some kind of underworld river, typically. Those rivers are often associated directly with forgetfulness, and they become repository of that which we've forgotten, or that which has been forgotten by the souls of those who've gone before us. So it's not just our memories that we are able to drink from when we drink from these waters. It is the memories of all who have gone before. It's a connection to those voices from the past. It's a way for us to reach out to them and deepen our connection. A drink from the waters brings inspiration and wisdom from all who've gone before. I like to think that when we call out in ritual, in ADF rituals, for the well of wisdom, the spring of renewal, the waters of memory, and all those things that we're seeking, what we're calling for are these waters. They're reserved for a special few. We know this because you have to know the code. You have to be able to tell people when you get there that you're a child of earth and a starry heaven and that you deserve to have these waters. I think, though, that we are privileged to drink of them and that we are privileged to ask for them in ritual because of the relationship that we build in this life. Again, going back to earlier, piety has its advantages. And one of the big advantages is the ability to reach out and drink from this cup, either in this world or in the next. I'm spinning through stuff very quickly, and I know that. So, eyeing my clock. The other thing that you'll often find on the way to the underworld, the dogs. Everyone loves the dogs. So as the soul travels its path through old age and senility, it comes to the border of life and death itself, where and at the two worlds, the guardian stands. The dog is so very well suited to this role as final separator between life and death. The dog is domestic. The wolf is terrifyingly wild. Here, the guardians are called dog, but they have attributes of the wolf. The hound knows how to growl, which is a vocalization halfway between speech and silence, a sound that lacks reason but is filled with emotion and power. If you've ever heard a dog growl, you know half of it. If you've ever heard a wolf growl, you know all of it. The hound is always said to be greedy and hungry. It's sleepless, and it is sharp-sensed. In the Rig Veda, Yama, who's the king of the dead, and we'll talk more about him later, he has two dogs, Sabla and Siama. The names themselves translate to Spot and Blackie, which appears to refer to their physical appearance, because the dogs are said to be four-eyed. And this does not mean they have four actual eyes. It means that they have spots above their eyes. Black spots, typically. This is part of why they're said to be keen-sighted and broad-nosed. They can smell and see more because they have more eyes. Rigveda 10:14-11 explicitly places them as protective beings, describing them as the two dogs that protect the path. In Avestan literature, there are two dogs that guard the bridge to the other world, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And to this day in Zoroastrianism, a four-eyed dog is brought in to watch the corpse of a newly deceased person to keep out the evil spirits. So they will go find a dog with black spots over its eyes and have it sit and watch the dead so that nothing can get a hold of it. Because that's a serious fear for a lot of folks. From the Eastern Indo-European guardian dogs, you can find a link to Kerberos, which has been posited. Kerberos is the Indo-European root. It's an assumed Indo-European root. It's reconstructed, which of course brings us to Cerberus, the dog that we are all most familiar with. And it's worth mentioning that, of course, there is a fearsome three-headed dog in both Greek mythology and, of course, the Harry Potter series. Yes. I was sitting in the theater watching that for the first time, the first Harry Potter movie. And I'm watching it, and at the back of the theater, when Fluffy puts his head over top of the kids and looking down at them, some little kid in the back goes, "It's Fluffy!" Which, of course, reminds me that the fearsome three-headed dog of the Greek underworld is possibly related to the word spot and the name Spot. So, Cerberus, Spot, whatever you want to call him. There has been some recent academic discussion about that's cast some doubt on the derivation, but it seems at least as well supported as other derivations, and I'm actually pretty fond of it, so I'm going to leave it right there. There are other explanations for the name. They often revolve around words for hunger, greed, and growl that can be reconstructed also from Proto-Indo-European. These are particularly convincing in Germanic stories. Giffer and Gary are described, as well as Freki. And each of these names appears to be derived from the Proto-Indo-European root gera, which generally indicates hunger, greed, devour. Garm is another Norse wolf, which is probably derived from the Proto-Indo-European ger, which is roar, howl, rage, growl, that kind of sound. Most of the dogs tend to appear in pairs, with the exception of Cerberus, who has 3 heads. So, still multiple, kind of. And what this does is, along with the 4 eyes, the sensing, it allows them, by being in pairs, it allows them to be sleepless. It allows them to always be watching. It's well known, too, though, that the dogs can be overcome. There are ways to get around them. Yama's dogs are satiated with consistent offerings of the Agnihotra sacrifice. So if you're doing that consistently, you get around these dogs. Cerberus is known for his love of honey-soaked cakes, as well as for gentle and pretty music, because Orpheus gets by in that way. You can also subdue these dogs with strength. Heracles does this in one of his labors. But these are clearly heroic feats that most mortals cannot actually accomplish on their own. The hellhound itself, with these close connections to the growl and the consistent depictions of hunger and greed, might best be thought of as a frightening representation of the great devourer that is death. Once you've passed the dog, you cannot come back. The offerings are ways of placating death, And if you can keep the dog away, you can have a long life. Work at it through sacrifice and gausti, that reciprocity that we talked about. Now, the dogs have a master, of course. And that master is the first king, the one who was sacrificed first, who died first, who paved the way for the rest of us, and thus became king of the dead, because he is the oldest of the dead. The first king offers or is part of the first sacrifice, which sets a precedent for all those who follow him and show the rest of us the right way to go. He is the model for us all. One of the best examples of this, of course, is Yama, who is clearly indicated as a king. He's the Vedic god of death. He was originally a mortal king, first to die, paved the way for the rest of us. He is the one who first found the way through death. He lit the torches for us to follow the path. And so he is there to welcome us when we arrive. The other thing is that the death of that first king, or the death of that king's twin, or the death of a cosmic giant, will often pave the way for the creation of the cosmos. If you are familiar with the Norse myth of Ymir, or the Vedic myth of Purusha, these two are really very clear. In both cases, they are giants who are slain, and their skulls become the sky, their eyebrows become the clouds, their mind becomes the moon, their blood becomes the sea, all of these things, and we'll talk more about that in a bit, but they create the cosmos. It's worth noting that the realm of the king of the dead is one where things don't exist. So when you hear descriptions from the myth about what is the other world like, they'll talk about things that aren't there. There is no pain, there is no death, there is no darkness. There are no memories in many cases. There are, you don't get ill. It's very negative in its description. It doesn't tell you what's there, it tells you what's not. Part of that is because we don't know. We just have no idea. We assume that it's different than this life. And what we know about this life is what there is. And so when we talk about the other world, we talk about what there isn't. Let's see. All right. So, trying to figure out which way I want to go on this. Look at my time again. So what I want to talk about next is, I mentioned that in that first primordial sacrifice, the world is created. The place that we live now is built. And one of the things that has stood out to me is that the work that we do in life is something that maintains the cosmos. And it makes sense that what we do in death does the same. It keeps the cosmos going in some way. And the way that I like to look at it is that much as that first death created the cosmos. So the earth becomes the body. Bones become stone. The sea becomes, or the blood becomes the sea. The eye becomes the sun that looks down upon all of us. The mind becomes the moon. The breath becomes the wind. Our hairs become the grasses. Limbs become trees. There's all sorts of neat imagery there. And I think that what happens over time is that when we die, we do the same. We maintain the cosmos. Whether that is physically or not is not really the question. But the act of living maintains the cosmos through our piety. The act of dying maintains the cosmos through reenactment of that first death. Now, there is a piece of lore, the final disposition of the soul, and it's called the House of Clay. So, in Rig Veda 789, a seer by the name of Vashista calls out to Varuna and says, "May I not now go to the House of Clay, O King Varuna, be gracious, you whose sovereignty is good, be gracious." In the Atharva Veda, the fathers are said to travel out by paths leading out from a fortress. And the other world is commonly described as having earthen ramparts, being a fortress itself. The House of Dawn is a dun or a fort that's made from battlements, and there's a house made of stone in it. Tartaros is surrounded by Herkos, which is a bronze-covered battlement. Anun is surrounded by castle walls, or walls of stone. Let's see. There's a wall that surrounds Hell in Norse mythology, built from clay flood's limbs, so the dirt and the mud. The name itself, Gastropnir, means guest squeezer. It's a tight passage, apparently. And through all of this description of that house of clay, the house of stone, we might get the idea of a cremation urn, that this is where everything ends. And when I was originally looking at this, I was reading Bruce Lincoln's book, Death, War, and Sacrifice, which is an excellent book, and a lot of this stuff in a lot more depth is in there. So if you're looking for a fun time of reading and watching someone progress from a very Eliadian worldview of religion to a very Marxist view of religion, this is a great book to do that in. But Bruce Lincoln was, when he wrote it, dealing with the death of his father, becoming a neo-Marxist. And when I read it, I was actually potentially at the time dealing with the death of my own father. He'd been diagnosed with cancer, and I was looking into this prior to the diagnosis, and it just became a different experience. And Lincoln comes to the conclusion that the House of Clay is merely the burial mound, that is the end result. I came to a different conclusion. As I read more of this, I felt that the House of Clay is a place that one might go, but that's not the important part. And it's clearly not a one-way trip. The fathers in Vedic mythology come out from the House of Clay, they come down to the place of sacrifice, they are honored again and again. And in fact, we will, tonight in ritual, call for that in a little bit. But I think that death is not about coming to an ending place. Death in an Indo-European sense means something different. It's escape from the growling monster of old age, escape from worry and care, an opportunity to live forever in bliss or knowledge, and perhaps most importantly, a chance to maintain the cosmos in an ultimate way, to give your body back to the earth, to have your mind become the moon, to have your eye look down upon the earth from the sun, to have your breath join the wind and your blood join the waters as they flow to the sea. There's a lot to be said for maintaining the cosmos after death. It's a final act of piety, it's a final act of good work. And I think that those who go into death knowing that this is all a cycle, regardless of where we're going to go or come from, I think that is about as comforting a feeling as I can get from death, which is really hard. But returning back to Vashitha, who's calling out to Varuna, he says, "On no account, Varuna, let me go to the earthen house. O king, have mercy. You of goodly rule, be the cause of mercy. As I go almost bursting like puffed up water skin, O holder of the stone, have mercy. You of godly rule, be the cause of mercy. From want of wisdom, I have somehow gone astray. O pure one, have mercy. You of goodly rule, be the cause of mercy. Thirst has found me, your praiser, standing in the midst of water. Have mercy. You of goodly rule, be the cause of mercy. Whatsoever wrong, Varuna, we as human beings do against the host of God, out of ignorance, what law of yours we have infringed, harm us not, O God, on the account of that offense." So here he stands facing death, knowing that he already stands in the waters and is tempted to drink. Here he places his trust with one final call, that he be remembered for what he has done, to the God of order who ordained his fate. Let it be as I know it to be. That's what he asks. He doesn't ask to be truly immortal. He asks for it to be staved off. But he doesn't ask it to never happen. He asks instead for it to be as I know it to be. So that when the world does end for me, it continues for all others. And that's how I look at death. And after reading all of this stuff, that's where I have come when it comes to death. If we remember our ancestors, if we speak to them and we speak of them, if we tell their stories to one another, they live on. Their voices stay bright, and ours will too. If we tell our children about our parents and their parents, if we show them photos, they will be remembered. If we don't have children, if we affect others in positive ways, they will tell others of us as well. There are many ways to immortality. None of them end with physical immortality. But they can be positive impacts on many people's lives. And that's what I seek to do in my life. That's what I hope that you all do as well. But I also ask that you remember those who went before. Because we are the keepers of the memory, and we are the keepers of their immortality. It's important for us to do that. So I'm going to end this with a prayer that I wrote. And it's a prayer that I read at my father's funeral when he finally did pass. He beat cancer 3 times. It's not what killed him. So he won. But I read this at his funeral because I'd written it with him in mind in many ways. And it's the prayer that when someone has a funeral and they post on one of the ADF lists or something like that, I post this because it seems to hit home for a lot of folks. So, when you were born, the earth became your body, the stone became your bone, the sea became your blood, the sun became your eye, the moon became your mind, the wind became your breath. When you passed to the other world, your breath became the wind, your mind became the moon, your eye became the sun, your blood became the sea, your bone became the stone, your body became the earth. When we were born, you did the same for us. You called forth the earth and rocks, the sea arose and the sun descended, the moon shone down and the winds sang. For all those who come after, we shall do as you did for us. When we are gone, we shall do as you did before. This is how we maintain the cosmos. We remember, we do the work. So, that is the workshop portion. And because we started 5 minutes late, I'm going to hold you about 3 or 4 minutes, because tonight we're going to do a ritual for meeting the ancestors. And the reason that I wanted to do this ritual is because, again, this is about memory. The theme of the weekend is voices from the past, reaching back, trying to find those things in our past, in the ancient past, in the recent past, that we can connect to. And so what we're going to do in ritual tonight is we're going to do a trance journey. It will be a fairly light kind of trance journey, not anything like what Kirk did. A little bit deeper than a guided meditation, but not terribly deep. And we're going to call out to an ally to help us pass the waters, to pass them safely, and to arrive at the shore on the other side, where we will meet an ancestor, a series of ancestors, whatever it is that the other side holds for you, that's what you'll meet. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm excited to find out when you all tell me afterwards. I'm going to go right along with you, so I'll tell you what I find too. But the ritual will be fairly straightforward and probably a little bit of a slimmed down version of an ADF rite. The gates are already open at the festival, so we don't have to do that. And I've got a creative way of taking Omen in mind that will hopefully work out. I will encourage you, if you would like, because some of those seats are kind of hard, you can bring a towel or a blanket or something to sit on. If you are distracted by your body during meditation, I will recommend that, because we'll be sitting for a little bit, not doing much of anything physically. And let's see, there was something else I wanted to mention. And that was, yes. If folks would like to bring an offering, you may. I'd originally, in the description, I had suggested an offering to an ancestor or someone. However, we are making an offering to the ancestors by writing things down and putting them in the box, which if you haven't done, please consider doing. I will do the festival plug for you guys there. So I will have something, I think, for everyone to offer as we do this work. So if you don't have something, that's cool. Well, we got you covered. And let's see. Yeah, that's all I've got time for. So we'll end it there, and I will work the other piece that I wanted to talk to you about in a little bit. If you want a part in ritual, I'd love to have a little bit of help. Otherwise, it's going to be me standing up there waving my arm doing stuff, which is cool and all. I don't mind doing that. But if you'd like a part, I will be happy to offer one to you, and I have full trust that everyone here can do a part. And you'll have all of dinner to write it if you come see me now. So, with that, thank you all.